if aliens are real, I'm not 100% convinced, but I'm probably like 90% convinced. But if they are real, I leave in the room for bullshit. It's like, Jamie, get a picture of your shirt.
If they're
Show
real.
everybody the shirt you're wearing, why we're talking about that. It's a UFO. It says, can they see it? Believe that. That's a dope shirt. Exactly.
That's a saucer, if I've ever seen one.
I think if they're here, they're not going to let us. That's what I think.
Well, that's what...
I think they're going to swoop in and go, hey.
Well, that's...
Fuck.
I'm 25, right? I can't speak on anything. But just looking from past experience and, there's like drawings. Like
Right.
even in the Mona Lisa, there's a weird thing or whatever in the
Yeah, it looks like a
background
flying
and shit.
saucer.
But there's a spike. It's a spike in like... Because it's getting pretty weird here.
The spike, they think... It's hard to tell because sometimes when people talk about UFOs, a bunch of other people hallucinate or lie. Like there's a lot of that.
Right.
So every time there's a real legit UFO,
Right.
you get a bunch of nut cases who just want to tell crazy shit
Right.
about being taken
And
aboard
I seen one.
spaceships.
You've
seen a
never...
UFO?
Yeah.
What'd you see? What'd it look like?
I was probably 16. I was in upstate New York, and it would just stay there. So let me precursor this. My aunt and uncle were very strict, and we had to go to bed at a very strict deadline, probably 10 p.m. And I was looking out the window with my cousin, and it's just a light that just stays there and then just fucking goes off. I mean, you can't explain it.
Well, if you're 17 at the time?
16.
16? How
Probably.
how strong is this memory when you're like looking at it, when you're trying to remember it?
Medium.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I
for
mean, there's
sure-
something there.
For sure something took off and did something that didn't make sense to you?
For sure. And then in Utah, I mean, there's shit happens all the time. I mean, even here in LA, I can't tell you how many times, because I used to live in Tarzana. So there was like a balcony here, and it looked kind of like, it sounds corny, but like a classic like force field. Whenever you think of a force field, and it just kind of goes like this, and it's kind of like a dome in a circular shape, and it just goes like this and goes back in.
Whoa.
In Tarzana, looking down at the fucking city. And I'm like, how did no one else see this?
They might have.
But I was there with like fucking 4 other people, and they saw it too.
The thing about unique events is if a unique event happens and it never happens again, it's hard to remember. It's hard to be sure what you saw. It's hard. But if aliens are visiting us, like how often are they doing it? Like unique events would probably be what it would be.
Right.
It'd be like occasionally.
Right.
Once every 6 months, someone sees one somewhere. But they're here all the time. They probably just know how to evade detection. I mean, it just, if something can travel here from another planet, it's going to be able to know when they're being watched and when they're not being watched. That's not going to be hard.
That's why you gotta wonder if it's like intentional.
I think there's enough talk about it now that we're probably going to find out what it is in our lifetime. I never would think that before. I think the government withheld information for whatever reason. Maybe they think people are scared. Maybe they think it's a threat to the national security, to have a bunch of people worried that aliens are flying around us all the time. There's nothing we can do about it. Maybe they like had a conversation and they thought maybe it'd be better to keep people in the quiet or keep them in the dark so that they don't freak out, because there's nothing we can do about it anyway. If we just tell them that there's aliens that are visiting us all the time, that's not going to be good. They're not going to pay attention to taxes and mortgage rates and the stock market. They're going to be
care
like, holy
about uranium and
there's
shit
aliens.
like that.
They're around us all the time.
Yeah.
People are going to freak out. So I think like little drops of like this, the recent one they said, where they
what did the Pentagon just say?
Literally
like 2 fucking days ago.
They've recovered crafts that are not from this world, not made on Earth.
Not made on Earth.
Not made on Earth.
Yeah.
They're basically saying we don't know what the fuck it is, but we didn't make it. That's bananas. And I think that's going to lead to more and more information coming out about it, where we're going to try to get a sense of understanding, like how long have they known this? You know, how much of like all that Roswell, New Mexico shit was true. Like tell us what was going on.
And backtracking, you got to wonder if like, oh, we've been hiding this the whole time, or this is the first time for real that we don't know.
This is what I like to think. I like to think that the people that are in charge at the Pentagon are patriots, and they realize it's probably better, especially when you're dealing with the United States. It's in this kind of turmoil that they're in right now. It's crazy, between racial turmoil and turmoil with the police and turmoil with people protesting in cities and blocking traffic. There's so much crazy turmoil. They'd be like, no one's even going to notice now. Just say it now. Just say, yeah, we got UFOs. Like everything is so crazy. The news cycle of any crazy story like this is only a few days, and then people forget.
Well, or it's just people already know, and it's just normalization. Or and you think about movies as just normalizing you to the idea that I can't even, like the Canadian, I don't quote me on this, but a Canadian, someone in office was like, there's like 7 species of aliens in the U.S. government.
It would be crazy if it was true.
That's,
You know, Tommy Lee Jones and Will
do
Smith
y'all
were
remember
right
that?
all along.
Yeah, check that out. Please fact check that for
Is
me.
he a loony person, though?
I have no idea.
See, people can get elected and still be crazy. That's
for,
a problem.
For certain.
That's a problem. You know, just because, like, when you hear about someone having, like, a really high-profile job and they say something crazy, it doesn't mean they're not crazy. Just because they're the prime minister of some
Right.
fucking country, they could be out of their mind.
What do we got?
would
Something
kinda be-
close to that. How close? Where is
Canada's
that?
former defense minister claims that aliens are real. Apparently, there is a humanoid-esque race of aliens called the Tall Whites living among us. Huh. It's Adam Curry.
What publication is
Adam
this?
Curry.
Is this Vice?
Adam
There's on
Curry's
Vice,
alien.
there's a few other places.
Well,
There's a few.
he
So
did-
it's like a real deal.
He definitely said it seems like.
Come on.
That's crazy shit.
Yeah, that is crazy shit. The thing is that guy nuts? Like, what else does he believe in? You know, how does he feel about ghosts, right? When you think about, like, an alien sighting, like, if you saw an alien and then you never saw one again for the rest of your life,
Right.
it would fuck with your memory, even if the alien was real. If a saucer
Right.
emerged in front of you and then took off. It's the same thing with a ghost.
It's called the Wilson Memo. You can look it up. Admiral Wilson met with a scientist who's actually was featured in one of my films. Everybody has been debating whether or not this document of a conversation with an sitting admiral at the time is a real document. It's an actual conversation that happened, and this document is real. Everybody wants to know. The world is going crazy right now in the UFO world. I'll tell you straight up right now, I'm in the position to know, and it is a real document, that it is real. So the conversation you read in that conversation was had. I can't attest to every...
You're not being very clear.
Sure.
Please.
No problem. So there was a document that is circulating right now that is really big. It's going around everywhere. People are asking and
What is
wondering.
this document?
It's called the Wilson Memo, is how you can find it online, or the Wilson Leak.
There it is. Jimmy's got it. The Wilson Memorandum.
Admiral Wilson meets with this scientist, and they have this discussion, oddly enough, at special projects at EG&G. And if I remember, the document is from 2001. I'm telling everybody right now, it's real, and we'll see. My history is pretty good with, like, saying if something's real or not, right? So here we go. The document comes out. They meet at EG&G special projects. In 1989, they stumble into a problem. This happens. They put the technology away, and then they bring it back out and see if material science has caught up and if they can make any progress. So this document kind of talks about this process. The big thing I get from it, and a lot of it's vindicating to Bob, and one of the things that's vindicating, besides the EG&G thing, is that private industry, so this guy's an admiral, and he says, I found out about your SAP, your Special Access Program. I need to know about it. And he's going to a private part of industry, and he is denied access. And he says, I should be running this program. And they were able to deny him access. So I think the takeaway here is, check it out. I'm telling you that is an actual that is a leak. Now, everything said in that document, I don't know.
What are you talking about? What is said in that document specifically?
It's between a scientist and an admiral that are sitting, and they're having a meeting, and they're talking about the search for the UFO subject, the search to get special access program access to all of these different things like reverse engineering programs. So in this document, they talk about it. I believe that this document, the person that went was employed by Robert Bigelow, one of the guys that has a couple orbiting satellites and all that stuff.
He's the guy who owns Skinwalker Ranch.
No, he's not.
No?
He was the guy that owns
He used to own
Skinwalker.
it. Okay.
Yeah, he used to own it. There's a new owner, and I interviewed him for my other film, but there's a new owner, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that soon. But there's stuff that you'll be hearing about Skinwalker Ranch soon because there's a new owner. Anyway, the whole point of this insertion here is just that document kind of validates a lot of this idea Bob just said, that they make a little progress, then they can't go anywhere. They tuck it away, and then they bring it back out, 10 years later and start working on it. What is the limiting factor? I think Bob should speak on this, but it's the material science.
Yeah, it's really where physics is. So I can see them doing that. I mean, I didn't have any information on that, but I think what George uncovered is probably accurate. That we try and do what we can. And once we reach a roadblock going, we really can't figure it out, it's just friggin' wait, put the thing away, wait for science to catch up. And, a decade later, let's take the project out again and see, all right, now where can we go?
But there's got to be someone who remains informed, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you've got your scientists like you and Barry. You got your people that you compartmentalize. You got these people working on
Yeah,
this
there
project.
has to be some people
Right.
that know everything.
You've got security, and then someone's going to be on the outside saying, hey, we need people to guard this building. Don't let anybody in for 10 years.
I think a lot of that is private industry, and I think that's how
Really?
they keep it. Yeah, I think that's how they because the government is just so leaky. I think that's kind of what they're doing.
That's what the document kind of proves. You just articulated that it is in control of private industry.
What private industry? Some aerospace company? Something?
I don't know.
Yeah, the admiral wouldn't name it in the car
Right.
in the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
So they still have these things, supposedly.
I would guess. I mean, I don't have any information on that
Have
at
you
all.
ever asked anyone that has any inkling of any idea of where they got them or how they got them?
No, but something must have been said to me from Barry, but it was just too long ago, and I can't quite remember what was said, but it just left a seed in my mind. I think at least one of them was part of an archaeological dig, so it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig.
Whoa.
So that means it's not just old; it's ancient.
So we're following and pleading with him all the way out there. Please, just tell us. Please, I swear on my life this happened. He gets in the car, doors open. He looks up, and the only reason why I'm telling you this because he died. He looks up at Marco and I, and he goes, "It happened." Closed the door, and off he went. Now, the reason why I share that is because that's not something that I can put any weight on for the documentary for people like you, right? But as a personal message for me, knowing that level of validation on the inside, it kept us going. It was like, okay, why on earth would he have done that? Why on earth would he say? And that kept Marco and I going, and that was a personal level of validation that...
Is there any conventional explanation why the military shut everything down? Why they had military barricades set up around that area?
No, they did try to say that the creature was this guy who's got like some deformities, but I've seen the guy Modine or something like that. But you talk to the witnesses.
But why would the military shut the
I know.
town down because of a guy with deformities?
And
is
then
there?
for the doctors in the hospital, they said, oh, there was like a midget having a baby or something weird, just something that was just so ridiculous. It was like, and you talk to the witnesses and they're just like, oh, come on, I'm not even gonna, that's laughable at best. I mean, these girls came within 8 to 10 feet. Three women, Katya, 2 sisters, Liliani, and Valkyria, 14, 16, and 21. They got within 8 to 10 feet in broad daylight of this creature. And one of the things that doesn't come across in the film, when they saw this thing, they're looking like, what are we looking at here? They're walking through this field, and it's up against a cinder block wall. And one of them's looking at it, what is that? And it was crouched by the wall. It was weak and feeble. And one of them kind of like screeched, like, what is that? And it turned, and it looked right at the girls, locked eyes on them. Liliana grabs her younger sister, who's 14, Valkyria, and hightails it out of there. Katya is 21. She's frozen in her tracks, locked eyes with this creature, and it's communicating with her. Please help me. It wants help. It's weak, and it's feeble, and it's scared, and it's crouched down. Liliani realizes that Katya is back there. She gets, 100 feet down the path. She leaves her sister, stay here, I'm going back to get Katya. She runs back. And I asked Katya, and I asked all the girls, during that moment of contact, when you lock eyes, I know it's only a brief second, but during that moment of contact, what did you feel? Like, put me there. That's where the title comes from, Moment of Contact, because that was when they locked eyes on this creature. And that's when Katya said, help me, I'm scared. And it was feeble and suffering. And it's a very powerful moment. And these girls have been saying the same thing. The mother, it's the first time I'd ever reported on these so-called like men in dark suits that show up and intimidate witnesses. Honestly, I've been hearing about those cases for so many times, but I've avoided them because it's got so much baggage from men in black. It's just ridiculous. I just didn't even want to be associated with it. But I'd heard it. I can go on until I'm blue in the face. I go till tomorrow morning with the amount of cases, with generals too. But this time, when the mother said that these men showed up and tried to get the daughters to say they were lying and offered her a briefcase full of $100 bills and they could relocate, I don't know. For some reason, I said, okay, for the first time in 25 years, I'm going to report on these guys. And I did. And it's in the movie. You can hear the mother talking about it, and she's so emotional. And the mother came back to the location right after it happened. The smell, that stench, and the footprint on the ground. I mean, everybody talks about that stench, that it was so, they said, if you ever take like a skunk, multiply that by like 100,000, that would give you some indication of the level of like how putrid and nasty. It was paralyzing. And it stayed in the areas, like at the hospitals when they did the x-rays, and everybody talks about it. That stench, it was unbelievable. Like it fills your navel cavities and doesn't leave for a week. It was incredible. And then they all said the same thing.
And they couldn't get it out.
They couldn't get it out. Yeah, they sanitized the hospital. The guy said that he had to close off that wing of the hospital while they were sanitizing it because it was so intense. You know, so
How long did it last for?
I heard days and weeks is what I heard from people. And even the mother said when she went to where the creature was, she said that the stench, even there after the creature was gone, got in her nasal cavities, and she tried to flush it out with water and saline or whatever, and she just couldn't get it out of her nasal cavities. Really crazy. But they all did. I mean, everybody talked about that stench, you know? I mean, the military officer, the guy that drove the creature around, I was sitting across from him. You can't see his face, but I did. And I'm looking this guy in the eyes. I'm thinking, I could be looking at a guy that drove you have no idea, dude. You have no idea.
How did he describe it?
So, when I came back from that trip, people were like, how was your trip to Brazil? What was it like, man? They got great, smoothies and coffee. And I'm just like, I think an alien spaceship crashed, and they recovered live aliens. And we made contact, and the Americans came in. That's what I'm thinking about. So I told a couple people. On the last trip I came back, I was just like, I was so rocked. I couldn't reintegrate back into culture. I was just like, fuck, I think this happened. It's the biggest story ever. So people were asking me, even my neighbor who runs that Make-A-Wish Foundation. He was like, James, he goes, bro, I like you a lot and I got a lot of respect for you, but you lost me on this one. And I was like, I don't blame you, bro. I really don't. But listen to the witnesses. Just, that's all I say. And I would tell people, and I realized I can't talk about it. All I can say is just listen to the witnesses. Don't take it from me. But I'm looking at that guy in the eyes, Joe. And I've been at this for 30 years. I'm working on my 7th film right now. I'm looking this guy in the eyes and I'm like, this guy probably gonna trip me out so hard. And it ruined his life. He's to get this guy to go on camera, just like a week earlier, he was like, I don't care all the money in the world. I'm never coming forward. The risks are too high.
How did it ruin his life?
Because you're harboring this secret. You're being watched. You're being told not to ever talk about this. And you're looking over your shoulder all the time. And they call you, the military calls you periodically. They want to know where you are. And he's got this secret inside him that he can't tell the rest of the world. And he's thinking about all the different, everyone's out there speculating, is it real, is it fake, is it real, is it fake? And this guy drove a body around. Just think about that for a second. Think about the doctor who took the x-rays of this thing. Marco Leal, thank you, Marco, you're the man. Marco Leal found him 8 years ago. And he was like, he confirmed the story. He was still working at regional hospital. He goes, I'll never come forward. Marco kept going every year back and forth. Then he retired. And 4 years after he retired, he agreed to meet with us. He wasn't even sure he was going to go on. And I said, look, man, we'll film you from the back. We'll disguise your voice. Showed us photographs of him at the hospital. We know we've been trying to get at him. Excuse me. At the end of the interview, he said, thank you. I feel so much better. I've been shouldering that burden for 26 years, and I've so desperately wanted to share that story with the rest of the world.
But they're basically saying, think about the movie Abyss, where the aliens lived underwater. He was like, that's probably what's going on.
Yeah.
That there's some sort of alien base underwater or some meeting place, or that's where they hide. That's where they go to be undetected.
Do you think you're going to see it in your lifetime?
Bigfoot or aliens?
Aliens. Like, where it's like, oh, like we have to like talk to them now. We have to like interact with them.
There's a video that is impossible to ignore. There's some things that are impossible to ignore. And then there's eyewitness testimonies of people who are rock solid, totally dependable, like fighter pilots who have seen some things. Like the best example is this guy, Commander David Fravor, who was off the coast of San Diego in 2004. And this is corroborated by multiple points of data. They had this tracking system that tracks things above Earth's atmosphere, and they found this thing went from above 60,000 feet above sea level to 50 feet above sea level in less than a second. They have no idea how it's doing this. They have no idea. There's no method of propulsion that's visible. They followed this thing. They locked onto it. It blocked their radar. It blocked their tracking systems, rather. And then it jetted off at an impossible rate of speed. And then the Nimitz relocated this thing at their cat point. The cat point is where the fighter pilots, when they're doing this they're doing this exercise, they were supposed to meet at this very specific point, and that's where this thing had gone. Like this thing had read their manifest and knew, like, or read their plans and knew where they were going.
What's wild?
That is way more compelling to me than Bigfoot. The Bigfoot thing is just fun, but the alien thing is fun and likely. There's something going on. And so I go back and forth. Sometimes I think maybe it's some sort of government drone that's like so sophisticated, and it's totally top secret. And if we ever go to war with China, that's when they're going to break it out. And then sometimes I think what they are is something that's monitoring us and making sure we don't blow ourselves up, making sure that we make this journey from territorial apes with thermonuclear weapons into some sort of an advanced intergalactic society, and that there's a very crucial moment where the instincts of these tribal people, which is all of us, all human beings, are these tribal territorial people, where you have to keep them from sabotaging any possible future progress by blowing themselves up, by killing each other, by
what if we talk to
destroying
them
the Earth.
and then when you say that, they go, yeah, that was it. Is that easy? Like, not that easy, but like, you just go, is that it? You go,
yeah,
that's about it.
We're trying to keep you guys from blowing yourselves up. This is like, but maybe that's like the natural thing that you see. Like when civilizations advance, like there's a very precarious moment where like they have the capability of blowing themselves up, but the reason and the logic to not do it. But they also have these instincts to control resources and take over territories. They still have those instincts, but they have to bypass that. They have to figure out how to, and so that's when aliens start circling and just keeping an eye on us.
Yeah.
That's the primary.
I mean, that's what you would hope, right? Instead of like them attacking us.
Yes.
Because then so.
I think if they were going to attack us, they would have already done it. Like if they really could do all those things, they could probably take out our power grid pretty easy. Apparently, the stories are that they're able to shut down nuclear launches and nuclear facilities, and that they do that, and they hover over military bases, and that they'll just shut everything down just to let you know, hey, bitch, I can
That's
just
wild.
flip that switch. So
yeah.
Don't get too fucking squirrely out there.
That's so
weirdos.
crazy.
I was doing my first documentary back in 1997 when I was just naive enough to think I can get an interview with Steven Spielberg. We had a mutual friend involved, this woman, Janet, and she gets back to me and she's like, yeah, so Spielberg's definitely not going to meet with you, but he knows you're working on this UFO documentary. He thinks you should look into this landing case that happened in Africa at the school. And I said to myself at the time, and remind you guys that I was making a film on UFOs, and I dismissed it so quickly because I thought there's no way that a mass landing with the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony at a school in broad daylight could happen and the whole world not know about it. So I just walked away from that story for about 10 years. 10 years later, I'm doing an event at the National Press Club with Leslie Kane, who was part of the article in the New York Times that came out in 2017. And she introduced me to this guy, Randall Nickerson. And she's like, oh, he's working on this landing case in Africa. Long story short, he's working on a film now. I think it's coming out next year, specifically on just that case. Dan Farah is producing it. And he said, I'm working on the case, and if you want to do something with me on it, a small piece, I could. So I got back into it. I licensed some of the footage that Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist that came and interviewed the school children on camera within a week of it happening. He unfortunately looked the wrong way in London, got run down by a car and died. So I contacted the Institute with the help of Randall Nickerson. I licensed the archival footage. We tracked down the witnesses today. We flew them in from all different corners of the world, brought them together. A lot of them were standing right next to each other. They came face to face, and one of the things I realized was that there were roughly 100 kids in the playground, broad daylight, aerial school, Ruwa, Zimbabwe, 1994, and they got within arms, some of them within arm's length of these beings, and brought these witnesses together for the first time in 20 years. And a lot of them hadn't even told their significant others, just because they said they were tired of having to defend this. And I myself didn't believe it when I first heard about it back in 1997. And that segment of the film is the most, in my opinion, is the most powerful segment, because
it's very compelling.
You've got all these children saying what they saw on camera after it happened, and then you see them 20 years later, and then we go to Africa and we meet with the headmistress, or she was a teacher at the time. We meet with other witnesses. We go to the landing site. We talk to people at the school. That case is absolutely and it was witnessed by lots of other people in and around the area for several days before it chose a school to land.
It's so compelling because the children are all clearly, they're not actors. So as they're adults later, they're all talking about this moment, and it's like they had a religious experience together. Like they're all sharing it and talking about it, and you could tell it's like it's a deeply moving experience. If they were actors, they wouldn't have been able to do such a good job, because to convey the reality of that moment to them, to be able to have this interpretation of this event where they're all consistent in the story and they're all clearly still shook by this moment. It's really interesting because if you had that scene in a movie, it would take like a really good actor to pull it off. And they'd probably need multiple takes. They'd probably want to get the best one. But those kids, the way they were talking about it and the way they were drawing it, you're like, wow, it really does seem like something happened to them.
I know how credible that the testimony of the children is, because my partner, Rebecca, she's never had much of an interest in what I do, making documentaries on UFOs. I do other things as well, but when I was reviewing in the studio the archival interview of the children, she just dropped off a cup of coffee and she stopped and went, oh my God, those children are not lying. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Because look, I ask your audience to don't take it from me. Just suspend judgment for a moment and imagine, hypothetically, if a UFO or several UFOs landed at a school in broad daylight in Rua, Zimbabwe, Africa, and interacted telepathically with nearly 100 school children. Not all of them had telepathic, but seen the incident. How significant of a story would you give that?
Well, not only that, they had the same message.
Yes.
What the telepathic message was that technology is a real problem.
Yes.
And there's things that people are doing with technology that are going to ruin the earth.
Yes.
And they were trying to relay this to children, which is very strange.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, maybe they just thought they were adults because they were the same size as the aliens. I mean, do you think they knew that they were children? Do you think they understood that it was a school? I mean, this is all speculation, right?
But no, I definitely had to ask myself, look, during the production of the film, Paula Harris actually turned me on to another landing case that happened in Australia in 1966 at a school. And this time there were roughly 300 witnesses that saw a disc land right outside a playground in Australia. And we went to Australia and investigated that case, went to the landing site, talked to eyewitness testimony, people that jumped the fence at the school playground and ran over to where this thing landed. And then we even interviewed a guy who snapped a photograph of a disc, a Polaroid, back in 1966, 2 days prior to the incident. So it's very probably that we have photographic evidence, we have eyewitness testimony, and for the first time we've got testimony from a science teacher. So why do these things land at schools? It seems like, and I'm just totally speculating here, but it seems like if I were going to do that, it seems like a pretty benign environment. And we have testimony from military guys that we take a fairly hostile position towards things that penetrate sensitive military installations. And, so maybe, I'm just saying maybe
It's safe.
Maybe it's safe.
Maybe
but
it's
we
safe
have to stop reacting to intrusions by UFOs as a threat. I mean, that's the whole thing behind this new task force. And as much as I respect, the task force, my colleagues and I want to cooperate with them to the extent that we can bring information or resources to what they do. But there is more. This should not be looked at specifically as a threat. I mean, with the phenomena that we observe, I mean, if they wanted to blow up those F-18s, they could do it, okay? Obviously, that's not what it's all about. And this idea of just labeling it all as a threat because it's unknown, that's a wrong idea. 90% of the information comes from the public, comes from children, and very, very little of it is made up. In France, I mean, the data we get, at the French Space Agency comes through channels where if people reported something that's found to be untrue, they're going to be called by the police.
What are your thoughts on alien life, on life outside of this planet? Is this something you think about?
Yeah, I think there must be. Even in the solar system, I would not be surprised if we find microbes on Mars or on some of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn where there's liquid water.
Like Europa.
Yeah. And the reason is, that if you think about, the reason I think that, and it's a guess, is because if you look at the history of life on Earth, then, so Earth formed and it was just there was no life, it was a ball of rock. And almost as soon as it cooled down, we see evidence of life. So certainly 3.8 billion years ago, possibly even further back than that, we see evidence of life on Earth. So somewhere along the line, geochemistry, active geochemistry, became biochemistry on Earth. And we have some idea, that if you get gradients of temperature and acid and alkaline and the conditions that are naturally present on the surface of oceans, then complex carbon chemistry spontaneously happens. So we know that life, almost certainly we know that life began on Earth. I mean, the other option is it came from space or something like that, but it probably didn't, right? It probably began on Earth. So that means that at least here, that happened. And that we know that the conditions that led to the origin of life on Earth were present on Mars 4 billion years ago. And we know that they're present on Europa today. So I don't see that there's anything special. Life is just chemistry. And the idea that geochemistry becomes biochemistry is not fanciful because it happened here. So I think that given the same conditions, it would be surprising to me if the same thing didn't happen, in that life begins. So that's to test that is one of the great frontiers of science now. It's one of the great challenges, which is why another reason we're interested in Mars, because we know those conditions were there. We know there were what's called hydrothermal vent systems on the floors of oceans on Mars 3.8 or 4 billion years ago. So it would be good to know if what I've said is right. And the way we find out is to find life or evidence of past life.
Are you aware of the speculation that was going around? How recent was it, that Occupy thing, the octopus eggs? There was a group of scientists that were speculating that it's panspermia, the idea of panspermia, that it's possible that octopi had come from somewhere else. Some frozen eggs had actually come from somewhere else and landed on Earth. And these were like legitimate scientists that were contemplating, not morons.
I don't think...
Have you seen this?
No, I didn't. But I mean, I think it's unlikely. So panspermia doesn't have to be unlikely.
Right.
I mean, for example, you might have seen the other day we found an Earth rock on the moon.
Yes.
Right. Well, it was back on Earth now because the Apollo astronauts brought it back, didn't they? It's 4 billion years old or something like that.
One of the oldest rocks ever found.
Yeah.
Right.
So we know that material gets transferred between planets. And so it's not inconceivable that microbes could survive that journey. Right. We know that microbes can survive in space, for example. So that isn't mad. It's probably unlikely, but it's not mad. But with the octopus, I hadn't heard that. But the thing is that the octopus is still extremely similar biologically to us. I mean, the differences are negligible. Yeah. So it's still got the same energy system with this thing called ATP and DNA and all that stuff. It's all very, very similar.
It was something about RNA and DNA. Did you find that article?
I'm looking at a different one from a different website. It's about the same thing. It has to do with the Cambrian explosion. And there were 33 authors on a paper that got published in the Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology that talked about this possibility. There are other people that disagree with it, though.
Right. I mean, I suppose I haven't seen it. So I think it's unlikely because the octopus is extremely similar to us. So that suggests a common origin to me. That I suppose the counter argument you could advance would be there's only one way to do life. So you could say that actually because the laws of physics and chemistry are the same everywhere. So maybe DNA is the only way to do it. So that's the way it gets done.
Which is why they're so similar to us. Yeah, although so alien as well.
Yeah, they're not though. That's the thing about an octopus. That's why I'm surprised about it, because they're not that alien. They're very similar.
Well, they're in their abilities. I mean, their ability to transform their outer texture and their color almost instantaneously.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have incredible camouflage abilities that really don't exist in the mammalian world.
Yeah, but on a cellular level, you look at an octopus cell under a microscope, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an octopus cell and a human cell.
So the only way that would make sense is if all life comes from basically the same kind of building blocks and just varies depending upon the conditions and where it takes place.
I'm guessing, but yes, that must be the only way you could sustain that, given that they're so similar to us, because they really are biochemically. That's the only way it can be done, given the building block, the toolkit, the laws of nature, and the elements and so on that we have in our universe.
We have so many different life forms on our planet, but if we found anything that's remotely similar to what we have here on Earth on another planet, it would be such an incredible discovery. Like if we found a frog on the moon, I mean, the world would stop, right?
I'd be very surprised if we found a frog on the moon.
But I mean, if we found anything anywhere that is in any way similar, an insect on Mars.
Well, this is, I mean, as I say, it'd be micro. I think it'd be single-celled things. And remember, I mean, you mentioned the Cambrian explosion. So that is what we do know about Earth is that although life began, let's say, 3.8 billion years ago, it wasn't until around 600 million years ago or so, or maybe at most 700, that you see any complex multicellular organisms at all. So for something like 3 billion years, it was single-celled alone. And that's one of the reasons why I would guess, if I had to guess, I would say that microbes would be common because life began very quickly on Earth. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find it on Mars. But complex life, multicellular life, insects, plants, intelligence, I would guess would be very rare because it took so long on Earth to get there. And it was just slime. About 3 billion years of slime. It was that. That was it.
Let's take it back to the day that this happened. You're 22. You're logging. You're in the woods. Tell me what happened.
Well, it's just when you're done working hard physical labor, everybody's kind of jacked up, and there was a whole lot of chatter in the car. We're just talking away. It's starting to get dark. We just loaded up our equipment. We're headed out, and I looked up ahead, and I saw this kind of glow coming through the trees. First, I thought no big deal. It was deer hunting season. Thought maybe there was some hunters camped up on the hill up there. Maybe light shining through a tent. It was still something really strange. Kind of caught my eye, and one by one, the other guys in the crew started looking, but nobody said, "Oh my God, what's that?" or anything like that. It was just kind of an idle curiosity at first. But when we burst into the clearing where we could see the source of this glow, it was just whoa. I mean, it was just mind-blowing instantly. I inexplicably got out of the truck and ran toward this thing. But I thought it was just going to take off, be gone in a flash. And
so when you say in the clearing, so are you driving on a dirt road?
Yeah, it's a dirt road. Trees are real thick. This was a part of the contract we hadn't cut in yet, so trees were a lot thicker there, except for this clearing. And we weren't the only ones that saw it. We found out later. Sheriff had on file people who were in the area that saw it. Hunters and fishermen over there at Black Canyon Lake, and the movement that they described was what the crew described when it left. Of course, I didn't see that, but
what did they describe?
They described this glow rising up and streaking off, I believe they said, toward the northeast. There were some people that probably don't want to be public about it, but there was one guy who was just deer hunting. And he worked in military intelligence, and he stuck by what he and his wife saw. They were both together. And another guy that was at Black Canyon Lake, I won't mention any of those guys' names unless they chose to, but found out later that there was more official investigation that nobody talked about at the time. Immediately, though, this was all nonsense, and these guys murdered him, and even my oldest brother, he didn't believe him. He thought they had killed me. What we were doing with the brush that we cut was piling it up. There were piles that were in the clearing so that the Forest Service could burn these piles, when the conditions were right, where it wouldn't spread, wet conditions otherwise, but burn up this excess material to reduce the fire danger in the woods. And my oldest brother was tearing those piles apart. He was certain that my body was under there. And there were some pretty testy confrontations between him and my brother. And I think even my other brother, Dwayne, he initially took that approach, but he quickly became sure that they were telling the truth.
Now, what do you remember when you were going through your mind and you're trying? I mean, this is a story you've told so many times, and this is a story that's been turned into a film, which it's got to be very surreal. But when you look into your memories and you try to go back to that day.
Well, I don't try. It's something I try to block out, but it's unforgettable. And there's
what do you remember seeing when you ran into the clearing?
Well, the whole clearing was lit up with this weird glow. It's really hard to for any artist or movie to try to duplicate the strange glow there was there. Made everything look really really pretty eerie, and
Did it have a color to it?
it was kind of a golden color, but with a kind of a softness to it it wasn't like beams of light shooting out. It was just this haze of light.
And did it seem to come from a specific part of the craft, or?
Most of the surface seemed to be glowing. There were darker areas that didn't give off light, but it was the parts that weren't glowing. It wasn't so bright that you couldn't look at it, but it had a metallic look to it.
So what did the craft itself look like?
It was a classic disc-shaped craft. Years later, there was a report. I can never remember names, but this guy was saying that he worked at Area 51, and they had something in there. He worked with the Tester Model Corporation to create a model of what he was describing, and that's actually the closest of any of the other descriptions I've seen. But I don't think these things have just one type of craft. I think there's many different shapes.
What makes you think that?
Well, personal experience. I try not to emphasize these other incidents, but I've seen the glowing sphere. I've seen the giant black triangle. Other craft that were a ball of light that you couldn't penetrate the light with your eyes, but
now this is after this experience.
I think the reason my brother Dwayne was persuaded more quickly than my brother Don was that he saw a craft in those woods. It's probably 10 miles from there while deer hunting, and it was kind of tic-tac shaped, and that's something that's been observed by in military reports recently.
Yeah. So you see this thing, this disc-shaped craft, and then what happens?
It started to move and started to get louder.
Louder.
Yeah. It was the guys in the truck heard it too. There was a low thunderous kind of a rumble that you actually sort of felt more than heard. And then there were other high-pitched frequencies. I was talking to a group of students from technical college, and they were really interested in what the sound was like to try to, compare that with theories that they had concerning what might be their propulsion. But the increase in volume, it suddenly got louder as it started to move. And, at the same time, the guys in the truck were screaming, "Get away from there, let's go, get back in the truck, let's go." And, which would have been the smart thing to do. But as soon as it moved, it startled me, and I just ducked for cover. There was a log there. I got down behind this log, and they were screaming, let's go, let's go, let's go. And I didn't need to be told. I was just gonna, stand up and run away. But see, when I jumped for cover, I went down and forward to reach where the log would hide me, and that brought me closer to it. So when I stood up, at that point, that was the closest I was to the object.
How close?
It was still like 8 or 10 feet away, from the surface of it. But that was when the energy discharge happened. I've worked on a number of theories about what might have happened. At the time, some of the other guys on the truck were thinking, immediately Steve said, "It got him." Like, if you shot a deer, you got it,
Right.
And so it might not have been, as we assumed at first, that it was some kind of stun gun or something, but maybe just closing that gap allowed this energy to leap to ground through me. And
like static electricity or something.
Yeah, one thing that really weighs heavy in that direction is that when I found years later that they have satellites or something that record the number of lightning strikes, and that area has the highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the continental United States, except for the Everglades. The Everglades has a bit more, but that's over water. So that adds to another theory. What were they doing there,
So that area that has a high level of lightning strikes, do you think it makes sense that they're observing that? Or is that why they were there? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, up until a few years ago, you walk down the rim road, and if you see a tree that's been hit by lightning, you can always see it. It's a strip of bark that's just blasted out of there, and it's all bare, and it can actually still survive the lightning strike, but it turns the sap to steam instantly, and it just explodes out the side of the tree, blows the bark off. But I was at a conference where this lady was, I said, what's this? And she says, that's fulgurite. I said, what's that? And she says, that's when lightning strikes the earth. You've got millions of volts, millions of degrees that form these crystals that aren't formed geologically. So I kind of leaned towards this theory that perhaps they were looking for fulgurite, for a very unique kind of crystal that would be formed by that kind of blast of energy. I'd never heard of fulgurite before.